Well, let me start with kind of where we left off. We had the flood, and then we got Noah landing, and then God promising in the Yahweh's version that would never flood the earth again. But then in the 9th chapter, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air and on everything that creeps on the ground and all the flesh of the sea." Here we've got fish of the sea. Here we've got the first mention of the fish. We got the flood over, and now we've got the fish remembered. But all of these things that are flesh are into your hand. They are delivered. And every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Now, one inconsistency here is everything's given now, but later in the dietary code that comes up later, then there will be some things that are taken off the menu. But right now, everything is available. But only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. So this is kind of a law, but it's a universal pronouncement. I think it's just basically saying don't be wanton and just start, killing things and just devouring them and eating them alive. Sort of like the lions and tigers and those things start doing out in the wild. It's kind of like don't be like the beasts and the wild animals and eat things with the blood still in it. And a part of that is a sense of holiness and sacredness. People understood that when something stops breathing, it dies. And they learned pretty easily by observation that when you poke a hole in something and the blood starts flowing out, it dies. So they connected the idea of breath and blood with life. Well, who gives life? God gives life. So somehow life is a sacred thing, and it's in the blood and it's in the breath. So it's recognizing this. So don't eat living things while they're still alive. There's something wrong with that, these early folks are saying. Anyway, for your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another, I will require a reckoning for human life. Now that's not clearly spelled out in legalese, but it's making a statement about the sacredness of life. And whoever sheds the blood of a human, now we're getting it narrowing down a little bit, by a human shall that person's blood be shed, for in his own image God made humankind. And you be fruitful and multiply and abound in the earth and multiply in it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons and with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you." Now here's a universal covenant, not only for human beings, but with all living things. The birds, the domestic animals, and every animal on the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark, I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth." And right here, while we're here, bow, the word and the ideas is, it's not a pretty bow that people wear in their hair, but the bow and arrow bow. And it's a weapon of violence. But part of the imagery is the people at this time that this was written understood that was a weapon of war, and what came out of it were arrows. But in that imagery, they had the imagery of the lightning strikes during the thunderstorms were like arrows, and they were shot from God's bow. You know, we have this kind of analogy or image that when the lightning comes, that God is angry and God will strike you dead, and if you do something bad, and God will strike you dead. For that, the image is often lightning strike, and then it comes out of the heavens, and that if you're zapped, you know, God zapped you. Well, how did God zap you? Well, He shot that lightning with the bow. Well, God pretties it up and puts it in the sky as a sign of the covenant that He's making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. Set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. All creation. All creation. And when I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature and all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. And when the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." So we have, there's nowhere in that text, even though it's written and it's told and it's assumed, you are listening, and when you see the bow, you will know that. But in the words, it's not saying, so when you see it, you remember. It's saying, when the bow is there, God, will see it, and I will remember. And it's a way of saying, it's my reminder not to get mad and do this again. But the message to the people is, I'm making the covenant. I'm making the promise. I'm setting the sign to remind me so that you can have confidence. So that you can have confidence in the order of things. And you can trust. You don't have to fear. You can trust that I will not let this happen again. From my side, I will not do that. So, I had some notes to share. One of the things, this is kind of an idea that when the "be fruitful and fill the earth" answers von Rad and his commentary says this is answering an important theological question for the post-flood age. And as people are listening to the story, they're hearing and remembering the promises that God had made at creation. And then here comes the flood, and it raises questions. Well, are all the promises and all the things at the creation time still in effect? Or has everything changed? And in saying this again, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, that was commanded at creation and is now commanded again, is saying that that will of God, that purpose of God is still in effect. Still wants you to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And that elementary life function, procreation, and utilizing the gifts of the earth is still God's will for humankind. And not going to gather up all the people or start again on some little island out in the middle of the ocean and then leave the rest of the earth free of human beings, but no, fill the earth. Go everywhere. Now, the second question, has anything else changed? And the answer there is yes. The ideal, peaceful, harmonious image of the creation in the garden, that's not happening anymore. So we're getting a little more in touch with reality, that there is violence, there is bloodshed, there is a fact that, lions eat little lambs. And human beings have developed a taste for flesh. It's kind of troubling to see, these nature movies of chimpanzees that, they're so cute and they look like us and all of that, but then they are a lot like us because they protect territories and they'll gang up on and they will murder a chimpanzee from another group, and sometimes they will eat the flesh. When you're looking at nature, you want it all beautiful and lovely and sweet and all that, but it's kind of violent. I remember one of the pastors growing up, and I can't remember who it was, but the image stuck in my mind of he made this comment in a sermon once about, there's a lot of folks that'll call themselves Creekside Christians. I don't have to go to church. I can worship God when I'm out fishing and when I'm out in nature. And then they say, you ever spend much time out in nature? Well, you see death. You see big things eating little things. And sometimes it's kind of gruesome. I was at camp with the kids this summer, and I didn't know they were going to do it, but they called right at the first of camp, they called all of the sponsors up and asked us to share some advice or insight for the campers to think about this week, so help them get more out of camp. And since I hadn't been to camp and hadn't been a dean of a camp or done camp in a couple of 3 decades, I didn't have much to think about, but I did remember when I was a little kid, my mother was a Sunday school teacher, and she went to Camp Egan for a Sunday school teacher workshop for 2 or 3 days. And they invited the teachers to bring their children as guinea pigs for this teaching workshop. So I got taken along. And I remember in the creek, there was this big boulder that had fallen down somewhere, and there was a pool of water around it. And that boulder is still there. It's still sitting there, and there's kind of a pool of water around it. But I was out looking around and observing, and I saw this great big old bullfrog. And I was going up, and it goes kaplump into that pool. And then I saw a snake go kaplunk into the pool. The next day, I was exploring, and I saw a skeleton of a bullfrog floating in the pool. Well, later I found that snakes can grab things with their teeth. They don't have to swallow them like a python. The digestive juices in their mouth will digest the critter while they hold it, and they will eat it, and then they spit out the bones. Anybody seen that, heard that? Well, quit watching that other junk on TV and watch the nature shows. You can learn a lot about God's magnificent creation and how violent it can be sometimes. But anyway, the second question, has anything else changed? Yes, the relationship to the animal world. Humankind may now eat flesh, but we must respect the life as a gift from God, and this is universal, and it's not a religious rite or sacrifice kind of setting that this is mentioned in. It's not in the temple, it's not a cultic celebration, it's just for everyday life to respect this. And then the third, the divine image in man makes homicide wrong, and murderers are to be held accountable. And then Von Rad points out that the wording of the accountability, if man takes the life of another human being, his reckoning is that his life shall be taken by man. And what Von Rad says, it's, we can kind of slip by this, but the expression implies that God will not act to kill the murderer. God will not strike them dead with lightning. God will not make them sick with a plague. But that man is responsible for ordering the life of the world, and not just about murder, but that's the worst case, but in all matters, it's a beginning to give the responsibility over to human beings. And again, a part of this, we have to remind ourselves and shake ourselves, this is not a person way back in the primeval times writing it down, what they're saying in primeval times. This is about 9th century, and they're trying to look at what is now and how things are, and explain from primeval times, how did it get to be like this? How did it get to be like this? And so that's kind of where these things are coming from. This is how it is like now. Human beings do have courts and trials, and kings make judgments, and off with their heads, or send them to the guillotine or whatever. Human beings do this. And so it's kind of saying that this is a part of God's plan, that we take charge and be responsible. But the human community then develops structures and ways of carrying out this divine will, that we keep the order among ourselves. But he also mentions that the fact that it's only one life, and the murderer only, not the murderer's wife and children and tribe, because it feels like this may be another example of the limiting of the blood vengeance. Once again, reiterating that limitation on the blood vengeance that happens between tribes and communities. As we see in the Middle East and Near East now, the suicide bombings that take many lives, this escalation of the blood vengeance is still happening today. So it's very probable that without some strong limiting system of rule of law or some strong religious and cultural taboo for restraint, that it will just continue to escalate until we end up everybody killing each other. So the life setting of this text probably still had a lot of this violence. It's not a movement from peace and harmony and then, well, just in case something goes wrong, then we need to make this rule. No, it had gone wrong and was really wrong, and they made the rule to control and limit it. Okay. Oh, again, the Hebrew theology, if we look and compare with the other flood stories and events in the pagan world and literature, this, again, is a vehicle being used to affirm that even though there is violence and disorder in the creation, as creatures and as human beings, as we're struggling to survive, nevertheless, God does not retreat from the world and just leave us alone, but God is interacting and trying to work with us to draw upon us an understanding that there is a demand to follow God's will and God's purposes, and that God still holds a claim on us and all creatures, because it says there will be a reckoning. There will be a reckoning. And this is a strong affirmation that God is still involved here. God is still involved here. He didn't just create us, wind us up, like the clockmaker God, wind us up, set us over on the shelf, and then go away. God is going to be still involved here. And obligations on both sides. The covenant, and this one is mostly one-sided in that I will be your God, and it doesn't say, I will be your God, and you will be my people, and so I'm going to do these nice things for you, but you need to worship me and offer sacrifices and follow this code of ethics among yourselves and the community. That's not a part of this covenant. And I haven't looked for it, but the commentator said this covenant is never mentioned again in anywhere else in the Bible. It's just there, and then move on and leave it there. One of the reasons might be it's a universal covenant with all creation, so it doesn't need to be called upon as the people move into their own covenant relationship with God, with the Ten Commandments and the law of Moses and all of those things. It's kind of underneath it or above it or something. But this idea of covenant is introduced here, and God promises to all humanity and all animals and all of the world. But the main idea for the listener is take heart. Be comforted by this. Now, one of the things that's omitted or not there, because the technology hadn't developed yet, is the promises on God's side, as I said before, that God will not come and destroy the world. But that doesn't mean that the human beings might not destroy the creation. With the nuclear holocaust that we have worried about and been afraid of since we've developed nuclear energy and been developed for weaponry, we hoped and thought when we had the treaty with Russia and disarmament efforts to reduce the number of nuclear warheads that that worry is past. But now we have Korea trying to develop things. We got Iran trying to develop things. And then the fact that we've got in Russia lots of warheads that are still there, and we don't know what Putin's mind is like. And then if they have some kind of revolution and terrorists get a hold of their nuclear storehouse some way, or if something happens and Israel has developed theirs, these things are available to be stolen or to be taken and then used as dirty bombs and stuff. So the threat for serious problems here still exists, that human beings, not God, but human beings. And then we've really cleaned up in a lot of ways our air and water. When I was in New York City going to seminary, there's a huge... Remember one time I was over in New Jersey, and I looked back across and I could see Manhattan Island. And I could see the tallest buildings above. And at ground level, I could see down the streets a little bit. But across the middle was this big gray cloud of smog. It was thick. When I was over there, it's kind of like driving in the fog around here a few days ago. You could see a little ways, but you couldn't see very far because of all those water droplets. Well, these weren't water droplets in the air in New York City when I was in seminary. This was particles of ash and soot and smoke and all kinds of things. And I remember one of the interesting things, out in this part of the country, when we have rain and we go outside and we walk around, what happens to our shoes? You're nodding, but what? They get muddy, don't they? They get muddy. Well, that's the way I grew up. But then in New York City, when it rains and you walk around, it doesn't get muddy. It gets washed clean. The rain washes all the soot and the grime, and it washes it away. And it's clean. Around here, rain makes it muddy. Our cars get muddy. They get splashed. And in particular around here, when the dust is up in the clouds, then even the raindrops are mud drops sometimes. But it was clean there. And then after a rain and everything got washed away, the next morning we could look out on the windowsill outside the window, and it's like somebody took a pepper grinder. The little chunks of soot were like a pepper grinder. Anyway, when we went back for a choir tour a couple, 3 years ago, that cloud wasn't there. They've cleaned it up. So many of they gotten rid of the diesel in the vehicles. They're fuel efficient, and a lot of them are the natural gas in taxis and stuff, and lots of scrubbers and all kinds of smokestacks, and it's really cleaned it up, and it's nice. There are some rivers that used to be deathly that we've cleaned up. They've got fish in them again, and they've got people can swim without dying in them. So it's possible for us to work with creation and keep things clean, but by the same token, if we don't, it can be awful, and we can poison ourselves and our next generations. But the scary thing is that there are some ideologies of some people that defy rational thought and defy reason and defy scientific reality. And we don't have to look at crazy radical Islamists, we can look within Christianity and find radical Christians who take the Bible literally, but they read into passages their millennialist doctrines. Now, I didn't have time. I had a death call yesterday and a wedding yesterday, and I had to read all the commentaries, get ready for today, and I didn't take time to look it up. But there's something about a red heifer that has something to do with when the kingdom's coming and all of that. That it's just some obscure little passage that the millennialists have picked up, that if there's some red heifer in Israel, then this is the beginning of the end time. Well, there's some crazy evangelical Christians that are out there raising red heifers and trying to ship them to Israel to help it along. Now, if you've got that mentality that it's okay for the world to be destroyed by God or a nuclear holocaust or whatever, and you don't have to worry. I'm one of the 144,000 that will be saved. And God loves us 144,000, but God hates the rest of you and does not care for you. And God has decided from the beginning of time that some are saved and others are damned. And then when the world is destroyed, we'll all go to heaven. We'll meet Jesus in the sky. And all of these ideas that say we don't have to care about our neighbors. We don't have to care about the earth because it's all coming to an end shortly anyway. Not too long ago, and I can't remember whose administration it was, I try not to dwell on these things because if I do, it just makes me angry and it eats at me and it makes me an unpleasant person. So I try to forget and not dwell on it. But James Watt was our Secretary of Interior. Whose administration was he in? Anyway, he was an evangelical Christian who believed the end was coming soon. I mean, that was his theology. And it's crazy. There are some people who can polarize their world or compartmentalize it to where they can look at their Bible and they can believe the world is 6,000 years old, and by doing the genealogy and look at the New Testament and pick passages and say the world's coming to an end any day, and when they're looking at that, their world is here. And then they can go over here and talk to people who drill gas wells and oil wells and talk about those formations in the earth and how many millions of years they are, and they can converse with them on that level. And then they can just divide that, and then they come back over here and they're talking and they're saying, well, the world is only 6,000 years old, and then it's going to end here when Jesus comes back shortly. But anyway, Watt was Secretary of the Interior that dealt with our environment, our water, our air, our national parks, our national treasures. And, hey, if it's all coming to an end shortly anyway, we don't have to do anything to protect it. Hey, loggers, you want those redwood trees, the giant sequoias? Come on down. Cut them down and use them before the end time comes. You can have them because there's no need to preserve them. That mentality can make very foolish public policy based on misinterpretation of the Holy Scriptures. And so you don't have to be, like I say, it doesn't have to be an irrational, crazy Islamist. We've got them within our Christian community who misunderstand and misrepresent these texts. But from here, this is saying God is promising that God's never going to destroy the world or flesh or the creation. So if that's our belief and understanding, then it's up to us to care for that and treat it kindly and not do things with wanton disregard, thinking, well, it's all going to come to an end anyway. Or another one that's kind of disturbing. I have heard folks and read letters to the editor and stuff that there are a few people of the grandparent generation who have said they don't care what happens in the future because they will be dead and gone. They don't care about their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren that are coming along and what kind of world they're going to inherit. Just so self-concerned that it doesn't matter to me because I'll be gone. I'm not going to bother recycling. I'm not going to bother worrying about that or something else. That's not what our Scripture tells us that we should be thinking and feeling. So anyway, these texts, which seem to be just about a lot of old stuff, are very contemporary to challenge us and make us think about what we're doing and what's happening today, and the attitudes we have that would shape our decisions about the things we care about and the things that we will do. Well, after we get, God says, this is a sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. And then we move on to the sons of Noah who went out of the ark. They were Shem and Ham and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was peopled. So right there we've got an intention to, all right, we had creation, fill the earth, comes the flood, now be fruitful, fill the earth, and now we have, as they're saying, kind of an ecumenical understanding of how the earth gets repopulated. It's rather than coming from an Adam and Eve, now we're going to come from Noah and his descendants that will populate the earth. And they're thinking that that was one story, and it was separate before the flood story, and then the two had to be worked in together by the redactionist. But anyway, and one story of the harmony, they believe it was Shem, Canaan, and Japheth. And in another story, it was Ham, and then they had to get Ham and Canaan harmonized, so then Ham becomes the father of Canaan as the people. And as the populations, it's, again, back to looking in primeval times, how we got from there to how things are the way they are now. And so, does anybody recognize Shem as a people or a group, or Japheth as a people or a group, or Ham as a people or a group? Anybody recognize Canaan as a name of people or a group? Well, that's the main focus, because those are part of the people they fulfill. So what do you show? Oh, there's a big Japheth and Shem. Yeah, okay. It's got a little map showing us where, but that's projection of if it were, this is where they would be. Anybody heard of a European country called Piedmont? Piedmont. It's a region. You've heard of it. It exists. Well, I'm trying to help Bobby get smart, and so the teaching company has these lecture series, and he's taking European history now, and so he was listening to some of them, and they kept mentioning this Piedmont back in the 1700s and 1600s as their, and I'd never heard of it. But it's a region. It's not a country per se. It was a region. Okay. So we've got one scholar in our group. All right. He knows of Piedmont. Great. Well, I'd never heard of it. I mean, it's just France and Germany and Poland and Austria and Prussia and Germany and all those places. But where is it? He didn't read that much. It's just in the mix. I'll see if they show a map, and then I'll try to. We'll Google it. Okay. Okay. So where'd I go? Oh, well, we move ahead. Noah, a man of the soil, was first to plant a vineyard. He drank some of the wine and became drunk. And he lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and he told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backwards until they saw their dad's feet, and then they covered up his exposure. And their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew that his youngest son what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. May God make space for Japheth, and let him live in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave." Then after the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. Okay. Now, ordinarily, we could have just skipped over a lot of this stuff because we already had the flood story and we knew how it ended, and then these begats, we're getting into begats. They don't make any sense. Let's just skip over them and get to the interesting part and jump over here to the Tower of Babel story. That's fun. However, there are some interesting things going on here. Usually, have you ever had, well, you've read a lot of them, but had to put together an obituary for somebody, a family member, and when you're listing the children, what order do you list them? The oldest first, next, youngest. It's the way we do things. We've been doing it forever. Firstborn mentioned first, then secondborn, then down to last. In the order in verse 18, Shem first, Ham second, Japheth third. And then, when Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, lowest of the slaves. He shall be to his brothers, and let Canaan be the slave of Shem and Japheth." So we're talking about the Ham and Canaan He was nephew, not brother. And if we substituted Shem, Canaan for Ham and Japheth, he still would have been second-born and not last-born. So I'm not saying this is a lie or it's not true, just pointing out how we see that this is two stories that have been kind of worked together, and the ancient writers weren't as critical about getting it all straight as we would be today, but they were trying to harmonize the two stories. Some scholars feel like what his son had done to him, think that there's some nasty things that were not reported. Like some of those things on the TV, some of these scenes might be disturbing to younger people. Turn off the TV or send them out of the room. Don't watch it. Some of this stuff would be unfit for religious ears, so we're not even going to tell you about it. You can imagine whatever, but this was a way of stigmatizing Canaan, saying these are nasty people. They just don't have good values, and they don't behave very nicely. This is one of the etiologies of doing that, and one of the things that they said that the Hebrew language does not have the expressions like we have. I forget what the English term and grammar is, but the good, better, best. They don't have that. And so if you're going to express something as worse or better, there are other ways, and it's like God is holy. God is more holy as God is holy, holy. God is the most holy, 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 holy. You just do it 3 times as one of the ways of expressing that comparative of better, a good, better, best, or bad, worst. Let's see, it's worst. Yeah, bad, worse, worst. But in this, it's a way of saying Canaan, the people of Canaan are the lowest. So how do you say that? They're the scum of the earth, they're no good. Well, they're the slaves, and they're the slaves' slaves. It's a way of demeaning them. And it's not necessarily saying that as a people they are to be enslaved, because the Hebrew people got kind of touchy about slavery later on in their story. So, but some, and I don't know if any of you heard this, it's nowhere mentioned here, but I've heard about it. Nobody commented on it in the commentaries, but it's been picked up. Some have used this, that Ham represents the Negro race or the black Africans, and therefore this has been used to justify that slavery is a part of God's plan, God's will, and was used to justify that Ham was black, and that therefore him and his descendants were meant to be slaves, a part of the order of things. Do you know something about that?
When I was growing up, I actually heard the curse of Abraham, or
Ham,
of Noah,
curse of Noah,
quoted as God turned his skin black.
God turned his skin black and made him a slave.
That was the explanation for black people, and the further explanation for their becoming slaves. And by nature inferior and cursed by God to this position in society and in our... I remember how surprised I was when I got big enough to get involved with Scripture to find out that that was a misquote and there was nothing in that passage about anybody's skin being turned black.
Right. So you're surprised as when you grew up and started studying the Scripture to see that that was totally misrepresented in the text. But this was from a pulpit or in a Sunday school class, or where was that proclaimed?
I really can't remember, but it was definitely in church.
In church, yeah.
I can't remember whether it was a lay person, but I heard that any number of times.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, you all haven't. You haven't been, your minds warped and polluted by that kind of twisting of the text. But it's one way that, unfortunately, some people will take their preconceived notions and look for ways to justify their prejudices. Yeah, Ken?
I'd heard that, and as I remembered, I also was told at the same time, a group, not I personally alone, that one group, one was Gentile, one was Jew, and the other was black.
Okay, one was Jew, one was Gentile, and the other was black, of the three. And this was, coming out of Noah.
But from an older woman that was teaching junior church.
Older woman teaching junior church. Where?
A church.
At a church, not here.
No.
Okay. I don't.
Methodist church.
Okay. Well, if it were here, we'd have to go try to clean up our past and do penance for being a part of that.
Won't digress long. Seems like in 7th grade the teacher said something about North and South U.S.
Yeah.
And that they had come from, and I don't know which was which, Piedmont and Tidewater, and that their cultures were different, and this was a difference in the two when it came to the Civil War.
Oh, okay. Piedmont.
That's the way it was. I don't know more than that. Don't.
Okay. Well, the Piedmont and Tidewater areas of the country. Well, I had heard that the folks who came from different parts of Europe, their disposition did have an effect on how they were oriented to conditions here, and it's very interesting, and it seemed to make some sense of how that cultural and attitudinal and approach to life kind of conditions did make a difference in how our culture here in the United States manifested itself in different regions where some of those populations would decide to live. Anybody listen to Prairie Home Companion and Virginia.
State of Virginia.
Oh, Piedmont and Tidewater. So, is there any particular part of the cultural?
No.
Not sure what those characteristics were. Red clay country. Oh, here in our country. Okay. The European side. Okay.
Well, in North Carolina, where I grew up, considered the Piedmont section.
North Carolina, where you grew up, considered the Piedmont section. Okay.
I was raised in the Quaker Church.
In the Quaker Church. Peaceful people.
Oh, yes.
Never learned how to fight.
I have known some true objectors.
Oh, true pacifist objector. Yeah.
Needless to say, I'm no longer a Quaker.
That's true. You're here. But that's a strong tradition that we can affirm a lot of the goodness in the Quaker tradition. One more.
I've never read this among told this in seminary, but I connect this curse of Ham by Noah with the later invasion of Canaan,
Yeah.
subjugation of Canaan.
Yeah, the subjugation of Canaan with the invasion into the Promised Land.
I can imagine a redactor following the conquest of Canaan, going back and arranging this material as a way of justifying the Israelites coming in and subjugating Canaan.
Yeah. And in our American history, we've got some of that same justifying. We're the new Israel and all that kind of thing, and going, oh, you Googled Piedmont?
It's in the northern part of
Northern part of
Italy.
Italy. Okay.
James Watt was in office during Reagan's.
Okay, James Watt was Reagan's Secretary of the Interior. Okay. Well, one of the things that I had read somewhere about the characteristics, and it does have a little bit to do with our Hebrew people and some of the characteristics that when we get to Abraham that may or may not be there. But in America, as we had problems with folks moving across the country to cut down the trees, turn it into farmland, grow the crops, use up the soil, and then abandon it and move on. Abandon it and move on. In the cities, oh, it's too crowded. We don't like our neighbors. I'm going to go to the suburbs and get away from the city and all the nastiness. That there is something about those folks, like in Ireland with the famine and the conditions wherever where people decided, I don't like it here, I'm going to go to the New World. Okay, there is a great courage and adventuresome positive elements there that led to folks coming to take risks and to work hard and to, be independent and do things and have a vision and a dream to build something new. However, the flip side of that coin is when it gets uncomfortable and you don't like it, you just pack up and go away. And you leave the problems for somebody else. Whereas a lot of folks who didn't do that and stayed in Europe had a different qualities. They stuck to it. They were loyal to their tradition. They were loyal and cared about what little they had. And they hung in there. And some of the European cities, I haven't been there, I've just heard, are the cleanest. They take care of what they've got. The old buildings that are preserved for centuries to be honored and enjoyed. It didn't, well, let's tear it down. That's an old one. Let's build something new and beautiful and creative. University of Kansas. Have you visited the campus there?
Oh, yes. Very definitely. I had a son graduate.
I'm a graduate of KU. Yes, Bobby and I went back to look at KU. I walked around.